Welcome to the Prosperous Empath Podcast, designed especially for empaths and highly sensitive entrepreneurs just like you who are committed to achieving holistic success. I'm your host, Catherine Wood, Master Certified Coach, author, mastermind leader, and founder of Unbounded Potential, a boutique coaching firm for empathic entrepreneurs. I'm on a mission to bring empathy back into the world of business. Each episode will focus on achieving more by doing less through leveraging empath-friendly leadership practices, boundaries, rituals, and systems, all the while continuing to care deeply about ourselves, others, and the world around us. If you are committed to joyful living and running a conscious business, but amassing wealth while doing so, proving that you can have both in a society that tells you you can't, then you are in the right place. Join me here each week to find out how. Be sure to subscribe and leave a review so you won't miss an episode. Plus, you'll find all the show notes and helpful resources over at unbounded-potential.com. Hello. Welcome back to the podcast. Kat here. If you're new here, if you've been tuning in for a while, welcome. It's so lovely to have you here with me today. Today we're going to be sharing a replay of well-listened to and a well-loved episode of the podcast on boundaries. And it's so interesting, but so often the medicine that we need is often the medicine that we share. And boundaries has been a topic that's been front of center for me and something that I am continually reinventing and re-looking at and re-examining with fresh eyes as a mom of now 8.5-month-old and an entrepreneur. Like, how do I want to show up as a mama and an entrepreneur? And what I notice is that in this current season, those boundaries look a little different and they need to be reinvented and realigned based on the current season of life and the current stage that my business is in. Now, you might notice if you've been listening to the podcast for a while that my voice is a little scratchy. It sounds a little lower than usual, my pitch. And if I'm being quite honest, I'm coming off of some real sickness. I've had a sinus infection for well over the past month since returning home from my first 2-week international trip with my husband and my son. And it's been really challenging to recover, which I guess makes sense as a breastfeeding, co-sleeping mama. But it's had me really re-examine, what are my commitments in this current stage of life and what are the boundaries that support that. So I actually had to re-listen to this episode and it really supported me in making some decisions around some new directions I'm heading in the business and really some of the boundaries that I want to set to support me in living that experience of holistic success and truly in supporting that having it all mindset that I'm committed to. So that being said, we are pausing the podcast for the summer. We're taking a break for the summer, and I'm so excited to share that with you because if I take a look back, this is really my first summer being grounded in Massachusetts for a summer. Last summer, we were raring to buy a house and get our house set up to birth my son and bring him home. The summer before that, we were asking so many questions around where we were heading and what was present in our next stage of life. And the summer before that, we had just moved to Boston. So if you know me, you know how much I love the water and being by the sea. And can I just share with you all how excited I am to be grounded and feeling centered in myself, in my business, in my family, as a mama, in my home, in my state, to spend and enjoy a summer. So for the next, several months, I'll be really prioritizing enjoying my first summer as a mama with our son outside, spending time at the beach and in nature, doing the things that I have yearned and spent much of my lifetime dreaming about, and just truly letting those moments of joy and cherishing these early days of motherhood So excited to be taking this pause, and I wanted to share a little bit of where I came from to make this decision, because if we really think about boundaries, it's something that we struggle with so regularly as empaths, because we're so highly responsible. We care so deeply about the people we serve and the impact we want to make. And sometimes boundaries can become really gray. And what are we creating boundaries around? Now, when we have a clear sense of what we're committed to, it can become that much easier to ensure our boundaries are supportive of our highest commitments. But how do we actually know what we're committed to? And I think our hyper responsible natures as empaths can sometimes cloud those commitments or make them feel like obligations versus grounded, embodied, true expressions of who we are and what we are up to. So as you're thinking about what are you committed to, and what are those boundaries that you want to create around your highest commitments? I think it can be really helpful to just reflect on, again, what are those embodied, true expressions of what you are most committed to, or where do you most want to be expending your energy? Now, I can tell you that those two questions really supported me in making an empowered choice to take a break for the first time for the summer in releasing regular episodes. And truly, I'm so thrilled and I'm so proud of what we've created with the podcast. And I'm so excited to bring all these new insights from taking a summer break and sharing them with you after Labor Day sometime. We released the podcast in November 2022, and at that point in my life, I was a newly married mama. I was trying to figure out where we were going to move, where we were going to settle down, and there were just so many more questions than I had answers to. And now I feel like in this current stage of life and business, I'm just yearning for different things. And as I imagine many of you are as well, in this kind of post-pandemic, highly chaotic world that feels so overwhelming and turbulent, so many of us are craving space and spaciousness and quiet and inner peace. So if that feels like you too, I invite you to offer yourself a permission slip to re-examine your commitments and what there is to reassess the boundaries around them. In the meantime, between now and when you hear from me live again after the Labor Day sometime, you can still find me connecting in the Unbounded community, so join us there for sure. If you haven't already, we'll drop the link again in the show notes. And if you're looking to kickstart your fall with passion and purpose, I'll be reopening 2 spots in my private practice after Labor Day. So if you identify as an empath or a sensitive entrepreneur or leader, and you've really been yearning to get some high-level support to reach your next level or to re-examine what holistic success looks like for you in this current chapter of your life or your leadership or your business or even your mothering, I invite you to reach out. I rarely open spots in my private practice, and if my voice and my message speaks to you, then I would love to speak with you and see if it feels like a great fit. So be sure you're subscribed to my newsletter, as that's likely the only place I'll be sharing about the spots and how you can get some time on my calendar for us to connect and see if it's a great fit. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you have a wonderful and fantastic and fun summer, cherishing the beautiful moments in your life, and I will see you in the fall. In the meantime, I hope that you enjoy and take away some magic from this episode all about being generous but boundaried. Let's jump in. Hello there, and welcome back to another episode of the podcast. Thank you so much for tuning back in with me today. I am honored to have you here and thrilled to share with you about today's topic. Today, we're going to be talking about the art of becoming generous but boundaried in your business. And honestly, I think we could launch an entire podcast about boundaries in business. So take today's episode as just a little teaser. We're going to be talking a lot more about boundaries on the podcast. And if upleveling your boundaries in your heart-centered business is a topic that is really relevant for you, I highly encourage you check out our Boundary Bootcamp mini course over at unbounded-potential.com. It's a 5-day mini course with daily audio trainings and worksheets to support you in understanding how your boundaries were developed and how you can implement empowered boundaries to reclaim your time and energy. And I guess one of the reasons I talk about boundaries a lot is because I used to not have any. And I share a lot more about this in the mini course, but I grew up in a bed and breakfast. So think Gilmore Girls, but by the sea. And I was the innkeeper's daughter, and I worked at the inn my entire childhood. So just imagine being a little girl, an empath, a people pleaser, always wanting to make everyone happy, and your home is your work. And it was really hard for me to discern the lines between when I was working versus when I was off, when I was helping other people versus when I wasn't, because honestly, we had guests in our home 24/7, and we were 24/7 serving other people, taking care of other people. And don't get me wrong, I had an amazing childhood, but it was a huge part of my journey and not having those physical boundaries modeled for me, something that I really had to break up with and put in place intentionally as I grew my business and scaled it. So, all to say, honoring boundaries has been a linchpin to my success. They are something that I work with all of my clients on implementing in their own business. And boundaries are the foundation of healthy relationships in your business. They are what help protect your energy and prioritize your time and your wellness. And truly, they help us protect our relationship. They make us examine our own limits. They challenge us to communicate more directly, which ultimately helps us prevent miscommunications, misunderstandings, and built up resentment. I am a huge champion for boundaries in business, and I'm really excited to dig into today's topic with all of you. So today, we're going to share about 4 of the types of boundaries that you need to make sure are in place in your business. I'm going to walk you through some questions to ask for yourself as you're up-leveling your boundaries in these 4 areas. And I'm going to leave you with a couple of practices and even a sentence stem to support you in up-leveling your boundaries. So let's jump in. And I want to jump in with actually an anecdote. So at the end of last year, last December, in fact, we were going wedding dress shopping, and I was dress shopping with my mom and my friend Carrie Lynn, and we were out on Newbury Street in Boston. And for those of you who don't know, wedding dress shopping on Newbury Street is a very Boston thing to do. And, knowing myself to be a decisive decision maker, I probably should have given myself more credit for thinking I'd find the dress, but I really didn't. I didn't think I was going to find the dress. And I had done no pre-preparation, no searching for wedding dresses. I didn't have a vision board. I didn't have that journal that many young girls kind of spend their whole life growing up imagining. None of that was true for me. We found, I think, 5 dresses for me to try on that day. And I believe that we empathic CEOs, that we typically look for signs or gut responses when we make big decisions in our lives, whether it's an intuitive knowing, a feeling, a felt sense, something. And knowing myself, I could have imagined that intuitive hit may have come when I walked out with the dress on and I looked at my mom and we both just knew. And perhaps I did to some degree. But do you know what the wedding stylist said to me during our fitting that made me 100% certain? Maybe the price, the uniqueness of the dress, the fit. No, none of those things. The single question that she asked me that made all the difference was when I walked out with the dress on, she asked my permission to share her personal opinion with me. Wow. Now, perhaps you're chuckling at that, or perhaps it doesn't quite make sense, but stay with me for a moment. In my experience, there is nothing I appreciate more than a well-boundaried CEO or a wedding dress stylist in this case. So, what is a well-boundaried CEO? Generally speaking, a well-boundaried CEO knows how to stay in her own lane and trust that you are completely capable and competent to stay in yours. This allows for more authentic and direct communication. In short, it allows for refreshingly transparent relationships. A well-boundaried CEO is someone who doesn't assume they know what's best for you, who doesn't assume they know what you think, and doesn't assume they know better than you. A well-boundaried CEO is someone who honors both your time and their own, who does what they say they'll do, and acknowledges and owns a breakdown when there is one. A well-boundaried CEO is also someone who values their word and the agreements that they make and the contracts they sign. In my experience, there's more power and integrity in partnering and collaborating with this caliber of human. It's a sign that they've done their own work to be able to show up this conscious and considerate in service of themselves and the individuals they partner with. Honestly, when that stylist asked me permission to give me her opinion, I knew I could trust her to tell me what was true for her. It made me respect her even more. And in my experience, that's the gift of working with well-boundaried, heart-centered entrepreneurs. Another example of this is that recently I was chatting with a girlfriend and I was sharing with her something stressful about what was going on in my life. And I was sharing with her just like this endless list of things that I had to do. And out of the blue, she was like, Kat, here's my unsolicited opinion about this. Now, even in that example, while she didn't pause like the wedding stylist did to see if she had my consent to give her opinion, the fact that she acknowledged that her opinion was unsolicited and that it was hers rather than what needed to be true for me was ultimately what allowed me to open up and to hear her fully. And thank goodness I did, because honestly, what she shared that day made a huge difference for me. And I think I was able to hear it more fully because she was responsible for the lens through which she delivered it. I am so grateful for working with clients who are committed to doing this type of work for themselves. As a recovering pleaser and an empathic woman, it makes all the difference for me, both in the depth of my relationships, the ownership of my voice and self-expression, and the fulfillment in my work. Being well-boundaried is an indicator that you too are committed to your own growth. It's an indicator that you're doing your work to be more self-aware and conscious. It's also an indicator that you can be trusted and that people will want to work with you. There's honor, there's integrity and honor and power in holding your own boundaries and respecting the boundaries of other people. There's deeper relationships and more authenticity accessible in honoring boundaries and the boundaries of others. And I notice that I have more access to trust, both being trusting of myself and others as a consequence of being well-boundaried. With that, I want to share with you 4 types of boundaries that will serve you well in ensuring are in place in your boundaries. So the first type of boundaries are physical boundaries. And I'm kind of chuckling in here because I literally had to come into my bedroom to record our podcast today because my 2 dogs are in my office and they were being so loud that I needed some physical space from them to have silence. So our physical boundaries are the ones that are easier to see and also to some degree easier to define. Your physical boundaries help define when you're working and when you're not working. They help you define when you're available for conversation, when you're not. Your physical boundaries help support your diet and nutrition, and they help prioritize your time to rest or to work. So regardless of where you are on your journey in upleveling your boundaries in business, I think your physical boundaries is a great place to start because they can be easier to implement. So take a look around your work-life balance. See what's in alignment, what's out of alignment, what is working for you, what's supporting you, what's not. I think a couple great questions to ask you around physical boundaries are, let's see. How do I define when I'm working and when I'm not working? How will I prioritize the time I need to rest? I think those are two great ones to start. Some that have really supported me over the years with physical boundaries are ensuring I have lunch pre-made. So if I know that I don't have a long lunch break midweek, that I already have a meal prepared for me or easy to make in the fridge so that I can make sure I eat. And several years ago, when I was just starting out in business, my now husband and I, we had just moved in together and we were in our first apartment together, and it was a 1-bedroom. And we had my office nestled into a little corner of our bedroom, which is really hard for a recovering workaholic. So I really needed to clearly define my own physical boundaries of when I was working and when I wasn't working. And two of the structures that made such a difference for me was I had a night light on my desk. It was a milk lamp. And when I turned that lamp on, that signified when I was working. And when I turned the lamp off at the end of the day, I had a ritual of it. I would turn the lamp off, I would close my laptop, and I would intentionally leave the bedroom and close the bedroom door. And that made such a difference for me in just creating that physical ritual to separate when I'm working and when I'm not. Another structure, another boundary we put in place was to throw it was like a throw. It was like a throw that we threw on the bed. And when the throw was on the bed, that was a sign that I could lounge, that I was no longer working. So those are just some random examples, but they have made such a difference for me in really looking at what I could see and what could help me define those physical boundaries. The second area of boundaries that we absolutely need to look at are your time boundaries. So time boundaries are the boundaries that you set for yourself regarding how you spend your time, how you prioritize your time, what your time is worth. And for many of us heart-centered entrepreneurs, we go into business because we are driven by our passions. We're driven by the difference we want to make, the contributions we want to have. And it can be really hard to honor the work-life balance, or lack thereof. Really, balance is sometimes a figment of our imagination after all. It can be really hard to honor your own time boundaries. So you really need to look intentionally around a couple factors. First of all, what is the season of business that you're in? And I've written a couple of really great articles on the 3 seasons of business, the 3 stages of business that you may be in. So we'll link to those in the show notes. But depending on the season of business that you're in, there may be different requirements expected of you in terms of your time. And when you can set your expectations straight around your own time boundaries, then you can be that much more likely to set yourself up to honor them. When you are starting out in business and you're in the build-up stage of business, there's likely a higher requirement on time that you're going to want and even empower of yourself. I remember when I started out in my business, I was still working 9 to 5 in my day job and working 5 to 9 on my business. I literally worked around the clock at any moment I had free when I wasn't in my day job to build the foundation and the client pipeline so that I could leave my day job. And that was a really empowered choice for me in terms of my boundaries because I was in that startup stage of my business and I was super committed to what I was doing. And It was a choice that I made intentionally. Now, as I developed and became more of a mature business, then that, of course, wasn't going to be a sane decision for me any longer. And then that required an opportunity to upgrade my boundaries. So, some of the ways in which I honor boundaries at this point in my business are that I have very clear start and end days to my work day, to my client load, and to my work week. I have all of my client slots blocked in my calendar when I see one-on-one clients, when I hold my mastermind, when I'm available for coffee chats, when I'm available for podcast recordings with guests. And those are my spots. That's all I have available. And then I get to simply find the people who are available to fill those spots. And if they're not available during those spots, then I can just simply trust that they're not my people, or that this is not the right time, because they don't fit into the time boundaries that I have intentionally set for myself. And there's something that I can just trust and release about that. Adhering to my own ideal schedule is another structure that has been super useful to me over the years. It's really kind of the framework that helps me have a visual representation of everything I just shared about my time slots for clients, the mastermind, coffees, etc. And it's one of the exercises in the Boundary Bootcamp if you're looking for a clear directions and guidance for how to create and design your own ideal schedule. So some of the questions that you might ask yourself as you are working on time boundaries in business are the following. How much time would I like to reserve just for myself during the week, on the weekends, etc.? What takes priority when I'm divvying up my work time and my free time? And we'll leave it there for those two for time boundaries. The third type of boundaries that we're going to talk about are communication boundaries. Oof, communication boundaries are so important. In my experience, communication boundaries are some of the most helpful boundaries in protecting and honoring relationships. Communication boundaries are the types of boundaries that we set that relate to our thoughts and ideas, things like how we are willing to respond to someone versus not, how we respect our own ideas and respect the ideas of others, how we communicate and engage, how we are available to have conversations, discussions, disagreements with people, and how we're not. I'd say one of the most helpful books I have ever read on communication boundaries, as well as the fourth type of boundary we're going to talk about, it's called The 4 Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz, I think. And we'll link to that in the show notes. But that book was such a powerful read for me in learning how to become impeccable with my word, always do my best, and to not take other people personally, which is not easy. It's a learned practice. But I really highly recommend that book if you are working on stronger communication skills. It's really a profound and wise book, well beyond its years. So some of the questions that you might ask yourself if you're working on communication boundaries are the following. What does respecting ideas and others' perspectives mean to me? How will I show others I respect their ideas and perspectives? How will I hold true to my own beliefs and perspectives? And what will signify to me that it's time to walk away from a discussion, a client, an email exchange, a business opportunity? How will I know it's time to walk away? When you have the answers to those questions clearly articulated for yourself, it will become that much more easier with time to practice honoring those boundaries. And the fourth and final type of boundary that we're going to talk about are emotional boundaries. So to recap, we've talked about physical boundaries so far, time boundaries, communication boundaries, and the fourth, again, is emotional boundaries. Gosh, emotional boundaries can be challenging for some of us. Emotional boundaries are the types of boundaries that you set regarding what you're comfortable sharing emotionally with others and what you're not. Emotional boundaries are what supports us in having our own feelings, as well as keeping us from imposing our feelings onto others. They help us prevent emotional dumping. They help us prevent being dumped on by other people's BS. And they help us handle our feelings in an appropriate way. One of the tells if working on emotional boundaries may be relevant for you is if in the heat of a discussion or a disagreement with someone, if you notice yourself projecting your opinions, your feelings onto someone else, this is a tell that there may be some work for you to do here. So some of the examples of this that I've noticed over the years: I feel like you don't care about me. I feel like you're not respecting my time. So every time you notice the subject of the sentence isn't actually about you, that it's about someone else, and you're pointing the finger at someone else, even if you start the sentence with I, if the subject of the sentence is about someone else, then that is a tell that emotional boundaries, there may be some work for you to do here. Because at the end of the day, we are all responsible for our own feelings, and we are responsible for our own experience. Our business colleagues, our clients, our collaborators, they are never responsible for making us feel a certain way. And every time we hand off our responsibility to them, every time in our heads we make it about them, we think it's their fault, we think they are not for us, and they may not be for you. But every time we make it more about them versus look within, we are projecting. We're taking someone else's stuff personally. We're making it about us, when in reality, everyone has a right to their own feelings. You get to decide whether they're appropriate or not. And at the end of the day, everyone is responsible for their own feelings. And what I notice at this point in my own journey is that the people that I partner with, the people that I attract, are the ones who have emotional boundaries in place. They are the clients, the colleagues, the partners who, even in the face of feeling offended or upset or having feelings, that they have the capacity to speak from their own experience. It's so key. I really can't speak to this work enough. There's some great information in the book, Nonviolent Communication, if this is something that you're working on. And again, the 4 agreements, and learning how to not take people personally will be a really useful resource for you as you engage in this work. So some of the questions that you might ask yourself if you're working on your own emotional boundaries are the following. Who will I turn to when I need to discuss something personal? And who am I not comfortable sharing personal things with? This is so important. I have lost more than one relationship over the years because I had not distinguished for myself the answer to that question. Who am I not comfortable sharing personal things with? I tend to think of myself as an open book, and what I noticed that one of the consequences of being an open book and sharing everything is that if people aren't at a place in their own journeys to hear what you have to say without comparing themselves and their experience with yours, that leaves a residue, that leaves an impact over here. And over time, that can breed resentment and hurt in relationship. So knowing who you can trust with certain type of material is such a game changer. Another question you might ask yourself: how will I make space to process my own emotions so that when I share, I'm not just dumping problems onto someone else? I think this is another key one. And I think, perhaps our partners, they bear the brunt of this because we think that they're just there to hear our venting whenever we need it. And in reality, we get to care for our partners. And one of the ways that we can do that is by simply asking them if they are available for us to vent, or if they're available for us to process some of our own emotions out loud. And when we do that, when we are responsible for our emotional needs, we are setting ourselves up for emotionally healthy and well-boundaried relationships. I hope those were useful, those 4 types of boundaries. So whether you're working on your emotional, your time, your communication, or your physical boundaries, I think it's some of the most important work that you can do. And a couple of final practices that I'll leave you with today. And there's a great blog there's so many articles on our blog about boundaries, but one in particular is about being a well-boundaried CEO. And we're repurposing some of this content here. So I'll be sure to share this blog in the show notes. So 3 final practices, or 2 practices and a sentence stem. So the first practice is to ask permission to share your personal opinion or feedback with others when it's about them. Just like the wedding stylist with me did, it makes such a difference if you have an opinion, when you think you have something that you're being right about, to ask without attachment if the person is open to hearing it. I noticed that in my personal relationships, practicing being an active listener and seeking to understand rather than project has been really useful. And one of the ways that I can practice, and you too, being an active listener, is asking permission to share your own personal opinion or feedback. The next one, which I think is really important for entrepreneurs, and particularly heart-centered entrepreneurs who value collaboration and partnership so much, is to honor your agreements and own the impact when you don't or can't. Consider that we make agreements with others all the time, everywhere, whether we're scheduling a call using someone's Acuity link, signing a contract with someone online, telling our partners when we'll be home, or even telling your nieces and nephews when you're available to play with them or hang out. Being a well-boundaried CEO and a conscious human being looks like actively working to honor those agreements, and in the process, honoring ourselves and the individuals that we make those agreements with. And last but not least, I want to leave you with a simple script that I find incredibly helpful in relationships. It's one that my clients tend to gain a lot from, so I hope that you enjoy it. Consider that in relationships, we make up a lot of assumptions about other people. We presume that we know what they're thinking, what they're believing, feeling, and then we operate on top of those assumptions. And particularly we as empaths do that, right? Because we sense other people's feelings and emotions. And there's a difference between sensing them versus being right about them and being attached that we are sensing the correct thing. It can be really hurtful, and it can also limit the authenticity in relationships when we are operating from those assumptions. So practicing this simple script has been a transformative experience for clients and for myself deeply. So next time you're feeling uncomfortable in a conversation, whether you're triggered or your nervous system is activated and you feel this need to jump in, to fix, to solve, to respond, to help, instead, try this. I notice I have an assumption that you blank, and then you're going to share something that you think they're feeling or needing, and then ask, is that true? So here's one I practiced recently. I notice I have an assumption that I hurt your feelings, and I'm wondering if you need an apology. Is that true? This is a simple and refreshing practice that is both vulnerable and deeply respectful and honoring to the people that you care about. This is an example of being well-boundaried but generous, and it is an example of what will make your relationships last. Thanks so much for listening to today's episode. Thank you so much for listening today to this episode of the Prosperous Empath Podcast with me, Catherine Wood. Make sure you subscribe and leave a review so you don't miss an episode and so more empaths just like you and me can find the show. As a thank you, each month, one lucky reviewer will receive a 60-minute coaching session with a member of our Unbounded Potential team. You can find all the show notes and bonus resources over at unbounded-potential.com. Thank you so much for listening and locking arms with me to bring empathy and prosperity back into the world of business.